San Giovanni Rotondo, October 4th, 1955. 3 in the morning. A young friar quietly enters Padre Pio's cell, intending to wake him for morning prayers. But the cell is empty. The friar searches the monastery. Finally, he finds Padre Pio kneeling in the chapel, alone, weeping before the crucifix. And he's uttering a prayer the young friar has never heard before. When Padre Pio notices the young man's presence, he simply says, "Today is his day. Today I must pray as he prayed." That young friar meticulously recorded everything in his diary, and what he witnessed completely transformed his understanding of prayer. Because Padre Pio wasn't just reciting any prayer, he was reciting the prayer. The prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi, the prayer that transformed a wealthy, pleasure-seeking young man into the most beloved saint in the history of the Church. And Padre Pio recited this prayer every year, always on the same day. Always in the same way, always weeping. Why did Padre Pio weep as he recited the prayer of Saint Francis? And what happens spiritually when you recite this prayer, specifically on October 4th? In the next few minutes, you'll uncover the deep mystical connection between Padre Pio of Pietrelcina and Saint Francis of Assisi. You'll learn why the prayer of Saint Francis is called the prayer of the stigmatized. You'll understand why October 4th isn't just another date on the calendar, but a spiritual portal that opens once a year. And in the end, you'll have the complete prayer that Padre Pio recited word for word, with the exact instructions on how to recite it to receive immediate spiritual protection. But before we continue, you need to understand something that most Catholics don't know. Padre Pio and Saint Francis weren't just two saints venerated by the Church. They were spiritually connected in a way that defies rational explanation. Both received the sacred stigmata, both had visions of Christ crucified, both suffered violent demonic attacks, and both recited the same prayer, the prayer you're about to learn. So, if you find any part of this story strange or improbable, remember this: you're dealing with two men who lived simultaneously in the visible and the invisible worlds. And what they knew about prayer saved thousands of souls. But the connection between Padre Pio and Saint Francis goes far beyond the stigmata. There are documents within the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo that reveal details that few know. In 1918, shortly after receiving the stigmata, Padre Pio penned a letter to his spiritual director. In that letter, he described a dream he had the night before the stigmata appeared. He dreamed he was in Assisi in the 13th century, and that Saint Francis approached him, placed his hands upon Padre Pio's, and said, "Brother, you will carry what I carried. Do not be afraid." Padre Pio awoke, terrified, not by the pain that was to come, but by the responsibility, because he understood that the stigmata weren't just wounds, they were a mission, the same mission that Francis received 700 years earlier, to reform the Church, not with words, but with redemptive suffering. And there's another extraordinary detail. Both saints received the stigmata on dates related to the cross. Francis on September 14th, the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. Padre Pio on September 20th, just 6 days later, during the same liturgical season. And both died after bearing those wounds through years of unrelenting suffering. A Franciscan friar who visited Padre Pio in 1950 asked a bold question. He asked, "Padre, why did God choose 2 Franciscans for the stigmata? Why not a Jesuit? A Dominican, a Benedictine?" Padre Pio responded with something profound. "Because Francis founded the order of total poverty, and stigmata are total spiritual poverty. You have nothing left of your own, not even your body is your own. Everything is God's, everything is for others. A Franciscan has already chosen to have nothing, so God can use everything. That response reveals the secret of the prayer of Saint Francis. It's a prayer of total poverty. You relinquish the right to be happy and to be understood, to be loved, and you offer everything so that others may have peace, understanding, love. It's the poverty that Francis preached, but applied to the spirit. And that's why it's so powerful. Assisi, Italy, year 1205. Francis Bernardone was 23 years old, wealthy, handsome, popular, the son of a prosperous cloth merchant. He led the youth of Assisi in parties and entertainment. He dreamed of being a knight and conquering military glory. He had everything a young man of the 13th century could desire, but there was an emptiness that not even he could explain. One day, while riding near Assisi, Francis encountered a leper on the road. Lepers were the greatest fear of medieval society. Incurable, contagious, deforming disease. Everyone fled from them. Francis had always fled too, but on that day, something changed. Francis stopped his horse, dismounted, walked to the leper, and embraced him. He kissed his wounds. When Francis returned to his horse, he turned to look at the leper, but he had disappeared. There was no one on the road, and Francis understood. It had been Christ. Christ had come to him, disguised as a leper, to test him, to transform him, to call him. That experience broke Francis completely. He abandoned everything: fortune, family, future. He dressed as a beggar. He began to live among the poor and lepers. His father, furious, disinherited him publicly in the town square of Assisi. Francis removed his clothes, returned them to his father, and said, "Until today, I called you Father. Now I have only one Father, who is in heaven." But Francis still didn't know what God wanted of him. So he prayed, and the answer came, literally. Francis was praying in the abandoned church of San Damiano when he heard a voice coming from the crucifix. "Francis, repair my house which is in ruins." Francis thought it was the physical church. He began to rebuild it with his own hands, carrying stones, but God was speaking of another house, the entire church, which at that time was corrupt, wealthy, distant from the people. God was calling Francis to reform the church, not with theology or politics, but with a radical example of poverty and love. And it was in this process of transformation, in this journey of abandoning everything to follow Christ totally, that Francis created the prayer that defined his mission, the prayer that would become the most recited after the Our Father and the Hail Mary, the prayer that Padre Pio, 700 years later, would recite, weeping. But few know the exact circumstances in which Francis composed this prayer. According to the writings of Brother Leo, Francis's closest companion, the prayer was born in a moment of deep crisis. It was 1209. Francis already had some followers, but there were conflicts, arguments about how to live poverty, disputes over who would be the leader, jealousy among the friars. Francis was devastated. He had abandoned everything to follow Christ in poverty and peace, and now he saw hatred, discord, and pride among his own brothers. He isolated himself in a cave for 3 days. He fasted. He wept, and he asked God, "How do I transform men who want to follow you, but who still carry ego?" And God answered, not with audible words, but with inspiration that filled Saint Francis's mind. The answer was, "Don't try to change others. Transform yourself into an instrument. Be you the peace you want to see. Be you the love that is missing. Be you the forgiveness that everyone needs." Saint Francis emerged from the cave with the prayer ready. He gathered the friars and said, "Brothers, do you want to know how to live like Christ? Pray this with me every day." And he taught the prayer for the first time. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." The friars began to pray, and in weeks, the discord ceased, not because Saint Francis imposed rules, but because each friar who prayed sincerely became a peacemaker. That is the first historical evidence of the power of this prayer. It doesn't just change the one who prays. It changes the environment around them, because when you become an instrument of peace, you emit a peacemaking presence. Demons of discord cannot operate near a true instrument of God. It's automatic spiritual expulsion. And Saint Francis saw this happen repeatedly. When he entered cities where there were civil wars, he prayed the prayer aloud, walking through the streets. And historical accounts document that numerous times, cities that had been in conflict for years made peace days after Saint Francis's visit. Coincidence? Not when it happens multiple times. It's measurable spiritual power. San Giovanni Rotondo, October 4th, 1955. Let's return to the moment when the young friar encountered Padre Pio in the chapel. Padre Pio noticed the young man's presence, but he didn't stop praying. He continued now in a louder voice, as if he wanted the friar to hear and learn. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is offense, let me bring forgiveness." The friar noticed something extraordinary. With each phrase that Padre Pio pronounced, he paused, as if he were listening to a response, as if he were dialoguing with someone invisible, and there were tears, silent tears that streamed down his face, marked by the stigmata. "Where there is discord, let me bring unity. Where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is error, let me bring truth. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is sadness, let me bring joy. Where there is darkness, let me bring light." The friar later wrote in his diary, "It was as if Padre Pio was seeing each word materialize, as if the prayer wasn't just words, but real power being released into the spiritual world. O Master, grant that I may seek more to console than to be consoled, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life." When Padre Pio finished, he was silent for long minutes. Then, without turning around, he said to the friar, "Did you see?" He answered. Saint Francis answered, "Today he always answers." The friar didn't understand. "How so?" answered. Padre Pio finally turned around. His eyes were still moist. And he explained something that few Catholics know. There are prayers of petition. You ask, God decides whether to grant it. There are prayers of praise. You glorify, God receives. There are prayers of intercession. You ask for others. The saints take it to God, but there's a rare type of prayer, a prayer of transformation. You don't ask for anything. You offer yourself as an instrument, and when God accepts, you become a channel of divine power. The prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi is a prayer of transformation. When you pray this prayer with a sincere heart, you are saying to God, "Use me. Where you see hatred, put me there and I will bring love. Where you see darkness, send me and I will bring light." I'm not asking you to solve my problems. I'm offering myself to be the solution to the problems of others. And why is that so powerful? Because when you become an instrument of God, you fall under direct divine protection. Demons can't touch a consecrated instrument. It's spiritual law. If you are an empty vessel asking, you are vulnerable. If you are a full vessel being used by God, you are untouchable. Saint Francis discovered this, Padre Pio lived this, and both received the stigmata as a seal of that consecration. Mount Alverna, September 14, 1224. Saint Francis was 42 years old. He had already founded the Franciscan order. He had already preached to the Muslim Sultan during the Crusades. He had already reformed the church with his example of radical poverty. But he wanted more. He wanted total union with Christ. Saint Francis ascended Mount Alverna to make a 40-day retreat of fasting and prayer. On September 14th, the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. While praying, Saint Francis had a vision. He saw a seraph with 6 wings descending from heaven. In the center of the seraph, there was a crucified man. It was Christ, but a Christ who was glorious and suffering at the same time. The vision approached Saint Francis, and rays of light came out of Christ's wounds and struck Saint Francis's hands, feet, and side. When the vision disappeared, Saint Francis looked at his own hands. There were wounds, real wounds, bleeding, on his feet too. And on his right side, a wound like the spear that pierced Christ. Saint Francis had received the stigmata, the physical marks of Christ's crucifixion, the first man in documented history to receive this gift, and these wounds bled for the rest of his life. He died 2 years later, in 1226, at only 44 years old. San Giovanni Rotondo, September 20th, 1918. Padre Pio was 31 years old, a Capuchin friar. He spent hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. He suffered demonic attacks every night. Demons beat him physically. They left marks. But Padre Pio continued praying. On that September 20th, after celebrating Mass, Padre Pio was praying before the crucifix when he felt a sharp pain in his hands. He looked. There was blood, open wounds on his palms, on his feet too, and on his side, a deep wound. Padre Pio tried to hide it. He used gloves, but he couldn't. The wounds bled so much that it was impossible to conceal them. Doctors examined him. There was no medical explanation. The wounds were complete perforations. They went through his hands from side to side, but there was no infection. They didn't heal. They bled constantly. They smelled like flower perfume, and they caused intense pain. Padre Pio carried the stigmata for 50 years, until the day he died in 1968. And during those 50 years, every October 4th, he prayed the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi, crying, because he knew something that few know. The stigmata are not a prize, they are a calling. You don't receive stigmata because you are holy. You receive them to become holy. They are wounds that constantly remind you, you are not your own. You belong to Christ. You no longer live for yourself. You live to carry the cross of others. You are an instrument, and the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi is the prayer of someone who understood this. But there's something else that few understand about the relationship between the stigmata and this prayer. Something that Padre Pio revealed to a doctor who examined him in 1920. The doctor inquired, "Padre, do the wounds ache more at a specific time?" Padre Pio responded, "Yes, they ache more when I'm not being used as an instrument. When I'm focused on myself, on my pain, on my problems, the wounds burn like fire. But when I'm hearing confessions, consoling souls, praying for others, the pain diminishes. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes bearable." The doctor didn't understand. How could physical pain depend on a spiritual state? But Padre Pio explained something profound. He said, the stigmata are a participation in the cross of Christ, and Christ didn't suffer for himself. He suffered for others. When I suffer for myself, it's pain without meaning. When I suffer being an instrument, it's redeeming pain, and redeeming pain brings grace with it. Grace that alleviates. This is the same dynamic as the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi. When you pray, "Make me an instrument," and then live focused on your own problems, There's a spiritual contradiction. Your soul feels it, and you suffer more. But when you pray and then live serving, there's alignment. Your prayer and your life are one, and God fills you with a peace that the world cannot give. And there's more. Padre Pio taught that this prayer creates spiritual protection against demonic attacks. He used to say, demons attack the ego. When you live for yourself, you have an ego. Ego is a doorway, but when you are an instrument, you have no ego. You are empty of yourself. Demons can't find anything to grab onto. It's like trying to attack a mirror. They only see Christ in you, and they flee. There's a documented testimony from 1942, during World War II. San Giovanni Rotondo was bombed by Allied planes. Bombs fell on the city, but the monastery where Padre Pio resided was spared. Pilots later reported that they saw a figure of a giant friar in the sky, with his hands extended, blocking the planes. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Padre Pio was praying the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi at the time of the bombing. Witnesses confirmed it. Where there is war, may I bring peace. Padre Pio prayed. And planes that came to bring war could not complete their mission. It's spiritual literalness. The prayer isn't a metaphor. It's an invocation of real power. Padre Pio once explained to a priest friend why he prayed the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi, specifically on October 4th. He said, Saint Francis penned this prayer when he decided to be an instrument. I pray this prayer on his feast day to renew my consecration, to say to God, I am still available. I am still an instrument. Use me for another year. And why did Padre Pio weep when he prayed? The priest inquired. Padre Pio responded, because I know what God will ask of me. I know the suffering that comes with being an instrument. I know the crosses I will have to carry, but I keep saying yes, and the tears are from the weight of that decision. Now you understand why October 4th isn't just a date. It's a renewal of consecration. It's a day when heaven listens to this prayer with special attention, because it was on this day that Saint Francis was born into eternity. It was on this day that he entered into glory, carrying the wounds of Christ. And it's on this day that all who want to be instruments of God can pray the same prayer and receive the same anointing. But let me explain this concept of a spiritual portal better. In the Catholic liturgical calendar, there are ordinary days. And there are loaded days. On ordinary days, heaven is open normally. You pray, God listens, saints intercede. But on loaded days, there is a special concentration of grace. It's as if the veil between heaven and earth becomes thinner. And prayers prayed on these days have greater weight. October 4th is a doubly loaded day. First, because it's the feast day of Saint Francis, one of the most powerful saints in heaven. Second, because it's the anniversary of his death, the moment in which he passed from earthly struggle to heavenly victory. And in the Catholic tradition, the day of a saint's death is the day of their birth into eternal life. It's when they reach the full power of intercession. So, when you pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi on October 4th, you're not just repeating beautiful words. You're invoking a prayer on the day of the maximum power of its author. It's like asking for help directly at the party of someone who can help. Saint Francis is attentive. Padre Pio is attentive. And Christ, who gave the stigmata to both, is attentive. There are accounts from mystics who describe visions of what happens in heaven on October 4th. St. Catherine of Bologna in the 15th century had a vision where she saw St. Francis seated on a throne next to Christ, and multitudes of angels bringing prayers from people on earth. The prayers that shone the brightest were those that used the words of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument. Each time someone prayed this sincerely, golden light rose from the earth to heaven, and St. Francis smiled, and a blessing descended. It may seem fantastical, but it's solid Catholic theology. The communion of saints is real. Saints in heaven hear prayers, they intercede, and they have special attention for prayers connected to them. Do you think Saint Francis is indifferent when someone prays the prayer he penned? Impossible. He intercedes with special force, and Padre Pio confirmed this several times. He said, "Pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi on any day. It's powerful. But pray it on October 4th. It's 10 times more powerful." Why? Because Saint Francis personally takes your consecration to the throne of God. You're not just praying. You're being presented to the Father by Saint Francis himself. But there's more. There's a detail that few know about this prayer. A detail that Padre Pio revealed, and that completely changes the way you pray. San Giovanni Rotondo. October 1960, a middle-aged woman came to confess with Padre Pio. She recounted that she had prayed the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi every day for years, but she felt that nothing was happening. She asked Padre Pio, "Why doesn't my life change? Why do I remain the same?" Padre Pio inquired, "How do you pray?" She recited the prayer by heart, quickly, mechanically. Padre Pio shook his head. "You're reciting, not praying. You're speaking to the air, not to God. Do you want to learn how to truly pray?" The woman nodded. Padre Pio then taught the method he used, and this method was recorded by several friars who were present at that confession. First, pray kneeling. The physical posture matters. Kneeling is the voluntary humbling of the body. It's you saying, "I acknowledge that I am lesser. I acknowledge that I need God." Reciting standing or sitting is casual conversation. Praying kneeling is a serious supplication. Second, pray slowly, very slowly. Each phrase, make a pause. Let the phrase enter your heart. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." Stop. Think. Do you really want to be an instrument? Are you really willing to go where God sends you? Don't move on to the next sentence until you truly feel the first one penetrate your soul. Third, pray with visualization. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. As you speak those words, visualize a specific situation of hatred in your life. That person who wronged you, that family member who hurts you, that enemy you can't forgive. Visualize yourself bringing love to that situation. See it happening. Imagine yourself embracing, forgiving, loving. Fourth, pray by truly offering yourself. "O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console." When you say this, you are making a covenant. You're saying, "God, the next time someone comes to me with a problem, I won't vent first. I will console first." You are giving God permission to use you. And fifth, the most important, pray expecting an answer. Padre Pio used to say that when you pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi in the right way, God answers immediately, not with an audible voice, but with inner peace, with spiritual certainty. You finish the prayer and you know, without knowing how you know, that you've been heard, that you've been accepted, that you are an instrument now. The lady did as Padre Pio instructed. She knelt right there in the confessional. She prayed the prayer slowly. When she finished, she was crying. She said, "I felt it." Padre Pio said, "Now you have prayed, now you are an instrument. Go and see what God will do through you." 6 months later, that woman returned to San Giovanni Rotondo. She sought out Padre Pio just to express her gratitude. She recounted that in the 6 months since she had learned to pray the prayer correctly, her life had been completely transformed. The son who had drifted from his faith had returned. The husband who struggled with alcohol had stopped. A neighbor who had been battling cancer went into remission. Coincidences? Padre Pio smiled and said, "There are no coincidences when you are an instrument of God. There is only God acting through you." This was not an isolated case. The archives of the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo contain hundreds of letters from people who learned from Padre Pio how to pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis and witnessed radical transformations. Let me share a few more documented cases. 1952. A businessman from Chicago went to San Giovanni Rotondo in utter despair. His company was failing. He had enormous debts, and worse, he had developed a bleeding ulcer from the stress. He pleaded with Padre Pio to pray for him. Padre Pio said, "I will not pray for you. You will pray." And he taught him the prayer penned by Saint Francis. The man was confused. How could a prayer about peace and love resolve debts and an ulcer? But he obeyed. 3 months later, he wrote to Padre Pio. The ulcer had healed without medical explanation, and an investor he didn't even know had offered to buy part of the company, paying exactly the amount of the debts, the man asked in the letter. "How did this happen?" Padre Pio replied. "When you stopped living anxiously for your problems and started living as an instrument of peace, God had room to work. Your anxiety was blocking the blessing. Prayer removed the blockage." 1965. A young nun in California wrote to Padre Pio seeking guidance. She had a clear vocation, but she lived tormented by impure thoughts she couldn't control. Her confessor said she had a demonic obsession. She was about to leave the convent. Thinking she wasn't worthy, Padre Pio responded with a letter of just 3 lines. "Pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi every day for 40 days. Then write to me again." The nun obeyed. On the 10th day, the thoughts diminished. On the 20th day, they ceased completely. On the 40th day, she experienced a profound peace she had never known. She wrote to Padre Pio in jubilation. He replied, "Do you understand? Demons attack people focused on themselves. When you became an instrument focused on others, they lost access. Keep the prayer. Keep the focus. They will not return." 1968. Padre Pio's final year of life. A young couple came to San Giovanni Rotondo. They had been married for 5 years. They argued constantly. They were considering divorce. Padre Pio received them together and said, "Do you both want to save your marriage?" They both said yes. Padre Pio then did something unusual. He said, "You will pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis together, out loud, kneeling, every day before going to sleep, for 30 days, without exception, even if you are fighting, especially if you are fighting." The couple found it strange, but they promised. In the first 2 weeks, they prayed mechanically, still angry with each other. But something began to change in the 3rd week. When they prayed, "Where there is injury, let me so pardon." It was difficult to continue holding grudges when they prayed, "That I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand." The arguments lost their power. On the 30th day, they wrote to Padre Pio, "We haven't fought for 10 days. It's a record since we got married." Padre Pio replied, "Continue praying, now not out of obligation, but out of gratitude." They continued. 60 years later, in 2028, the couple is still married. They still pray the prayer together, and they testify to their grandchildren, "Saint Francis and Padre Pio saved our marriage." And why do these things happen? Because the prayer penned by Saint Francis is not a selfish prayer. You're not asking for your life to improve. You are offering yourself to improve the lives of others. And when God sees someone like that, someone willing to be used without wanting credit, without wanting reward, just wanting to serve, God pours out graces, not necessarily in your life directly, but in the lives of those you touch. But the blessing returns. It always returns. Spiritual law. It is in giving that we receive. When you give love to those who harbor hatred, you receive love from where you least expect it. When you bring light to the darkness of others, your own darkness dissipates. When you console without seeking consolation, you are consoled by God directly. Saint Francis knew this. Padre Pio lived this. And now you know it too. But let me explain the deeper spiritual mechanics of it. Why exactly does this prayer have so much power? Padre Pio taught the theology behind it to a few close priests, and this teaching is rarely shared because it is advanced mystical theology. But you deserve to know. There are 3 types of prayer, according to Padre Pio. First type, prayer of supplication. You ask for something for yourself. God, heal me. God, give me a job. God, solve my problem. This prayer is valid. Jesus taught us to ask, but it has limitations, because you are in the position of receiving, and God can only give what is good for your soul. Sometimes what you ask for is not good, and God denies it, not for lack of love, but for an abundance of love. Second type, prayer of intercession. You ask for something for others. God, heal so-and-so. God, convert so-and-so. God, bless that family. This prayer is more powerful than supplication. Why? Because you are stepping outside of yourself. You are thinking of others. And the more you step outside of yourself, the more God enters into you. It's spiritual law. Ego and God cannot occupy the same space. Lessen your ego, and God will increase you. Now, let's talk about the third type, the prayer of offering. You ask for nothing. You offer yourself. God, use me. Wherever you need love, send me. Wherever you need peace, place me. I am your instrument. This is the most powerful prayer there is. Why? Because you are completely inverting the normal relationship. You're not asking God to serve you. You're offering yourself to serve God. And when you do this, something extraordinary happens in the spiritual world. Angels stir. Saints take notice. And God pours out grace not as a response to a request, but as equipment for a mission. When you ask for healing, God considers if it's a good thing. When you offer yourself as an instrument of healing, God fills you with healing power. A total difference. The prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi is a prayer of pure offering. From beginning to end, you ask for nothing for yourself. You offer everything of yourself. And that's why it bypasses all the normal limitations of prayer. You don't have to wait for God to decide if you deserve it. You've already decided that it's not about deserving, it's about serving. Padre Pio used to say, God cannot resist a soul that offers itself in this way. It's irresistible to him because it reminds him of Christ. Christ didn't come to ask, he came to offer. And when you pray as Christ prayed, you receive what Christ received. Power without measure to transform the world. There's one final story, one final testimony that I need to share, because it illustrates everything you've learned so far. 1958, a young priest, freshly ordained, went on a spiritual retreat in San Giovanni Rotondo. He was in crisis. He had entered the seminary with idealism. He wanted to save souls, change the world. But after 2 years of ministry, he was disillusioned. He had celebrated hundreds of masses, heard the confessions of hundreds of people, preached dozens of homilies, and he saw no fruit at all. People continued in the same sins. Families continued fighting. Young people continued to drift away from the faith. He went to Padre Pio and poured out his heart. Father, I'm thinking about giving it all up. I'm not suited to be a priest. I don't have the gift. Padre Pio listened in silence. When the young man finished, Padre Pio asked, "Do you pray?" The priest was offended. "Of course I pray. I celebrate Mass every day. I pray the breviary, the rosary." Padre Pio shook his head. "I didn't ask if you fulfill obligations. I asked if you pray." The priest didn't understand the difference. Padre Pio then explained, "You're treating God like a boss. You punch the clock, do your tasks, meet your quota, and expect results. But God doesn't want an employee. He wants an instrument. An instrument has no objective of its own. It has only one function, to be used by the one who holds it. You want fruit? Stop trying to produce it. Offer yourself to be used in God's production." And he taught the young priest the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi. He said, "Pray this every day for a year. Don't pray asking for fruit in your ministry. Pray offering yourself as an instrument and see what happens." The priest obeyed with skepticism, but he obeyed. He returned to his parish, continued celebrating masses, hearing confessions, preaching. But now, every morning before everything else, he prayed, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. I don't ask for conversions. I don't ask for results. Just use me as you will." 6 months later, something surprising happened. Families who had been fighting for years began to reconcile. Young people who hadn't set foot in church began to return. An alcoholic man, whom no one could help, stopped drinking. And when they asked what had changed, they all said the same thing. "I don't know, but the priest seems different. When he speaks, I feel peace." The priest hadn't changed his preaching technique. He hadn't taken a new course. He didn't have a special program. The only change was internal. He had stopped trying to be transformative and had become an instrument of transformation, and God was using him in ways he didn't even perceive. A year later, he returned to San Giovanni Rotondo to give thanks. Padre Pio said, "Do you understand now?" The young priest replied, "Yes, I was blocking God with my anxiety about results. When I offered myself only as an instrument, God had the freedom to work through me, and the fruits that I wanted so much came, but not as a result of my effort, as a result of God's grace flowing freely." Padre Pio smiled. "Exactly. Now you are a real priest. Not because you have ability, but because you are an empty channel that God can fill. That's the essence of the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi, to make you an empty channel, to remove obstructions, and to let God flow through you to reach a world that you alone could never reach. You've just discovered something that most Catholics will live their entire lives without knowing: the mystical connection between Padre Pio and Saint Francis, the profound meaning of the stigmata, and the exact method of praying the prayer that transforms you into an instrument of God. But this knowledge came at a cost. Videos like this require deep research in the archives of the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo. They require translation of friars' journals. They require the study of mystical theology, and channels that reveal these truths face resistance. The algorithm doesn't favor deep spiritual content. Monetization is limited. Spiritual attacks are real. This is where Super Thanks comes in. You just received a treasure. The prayer that Padre Pio prayed, the method he taught, the revelation about being an instrument of God. If this touched you, if you felt it wasn't an accident that you're here now, consider using the Super Thanks down below. It's not just financial support, it's you saying, "This truth needs to reach more people. More souls need to know that they can be instruments. I want this knowledge to spread." When you click that golden heart, you're funding the next revelation, the next video, the next soul who will discover their vocation as an instrument. You become part of the current that started with Francis, continued with Padre Pio, and now passes through you. Padre Pio used to say, "He who supports a spiritual work receives part of the fruits. Be part of this. Use super thanks. Keep these revelations coming to those who need them. Now, let's go to the complete protocol. How to pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis of Assisi the way Padre Pio taught. First, choose the time, ideally at dawn, as Padre Pio did. Why? Because in the morning your mind is fresh, your heart is quiet. You haven't yet carried the weight of the day. It's when you're most open to God. But if you can't manage it in the morning, pray when you can. The important thing is regularity. Second, prepare the environment, a quiet place without distractions. If possible, in front of a crucifix or an image of Saint Francis, light a candle. It's not superstition, it's focus. The candle reminds you that you are entering a sacred moment. Third, begin with silence. Before uttering the first word, remain in silence for a minute. Quiet the mind, quiet the heart, enter into the presence of God. Take 3 deep breaths. With each breath, release a worry. First breath, release worry about work. Second, release worry about family. Third, release worry about yourself. Now, you're ready. Fourth, pray the entire prayer slowly. Here it is, word for word, as Padre Pio prayed it. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Pause, breathe. Feel the weight of that decision. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Visualize someone you find it hard to love. See yourself loving them. Where there is injury, let me so pardon. Remember someone who has wronged you. Choose to forgive them. Now, where there is discord, let me sow union. Think of a broken relationship. See yourself restoring it. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Someone close to you who has lost faith, pray for that person. Now, where there is error, let me sow truth, not aggressive truth, truth with love. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. Someone you know is in despair. Be hope. Where there is sadness, let me sow joy. Joy isn't just cracking jokes. It's the gentle presence of God. Where there is darkness, let me sow light. Light is Christ. You bring Christ to the darkness of others. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console. This hurts because you want comfort, but you are saying others first, to be understood as to understand. Stop explaining your reasons. Understand the reasons of others. To be loved as to love, the ultimate sacrifice. Love without expecting return, for it is in giving that we receive an unbreakable spiritual law. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. If you don't forgive, God cannot forgive you. Jesus taught this. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life, dying to yourself, to ego, to self-will. Fifth, end with gratitude. After the prayer, don't get up immediately. Stay in silence for another minute. Give thanks. Thank God for accepting you as an instrument. Thank Saint Francis for creating this prayer. Thank Padre Pio for teaching the method. Gratitude seals the prayer. And sixth, observe. In the hours and days that follow, observe. Observe opportunities that arise for you to be an instrument. Someone will need comfort. You will have a chance to forgive. A situation will require you to bring light. These opportunities are not accidents. They are God using you. Don't miss them. Act. Padre Pio used to say. You pray to be an instrument. God will give you instrument work. Don't pray if you aren't ready to be used. And there's one last detail. A detail that Padre Pio revealed only to a few. If you really want to live as an instrument, pray this prayer every day for 40 days in a row. 40 days is a biblical period of transformation. Moses on the mountain, Jesus in the desert, the flood, resurrection to ascension. 40 days transforms. If you pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis every day for 40 days, in the way Padre Pio taught, something will change in you, not necessarily external circumstances, but you, internally. You will start to think differently, react differently, love differently, because you are being molded as an instrument, and instruments need to be sharpened, polished, prepared. And at the end of the 40 days, pray the prayer one more time, but this time, pray it as a renewal. Say to God, I saw what you did through me. I saw lives touched. I saw transformations. I want to continue. I renew my consecration. Continue to use me. This is the spiritual essence that Padre Pio lived. This is the legacy that Saint Francis left. And now this is the calling that stands before you. To be an instrument of peace in a world of war, to be light in the midst of darkness, to be love where there is hatred. The question isn't whether you are capable. The question is, are you willing? Saint Francis was rich and a party-goer. God transformed him into the saint of the poor. Padre Pio was a simple peasant. God transformed him into a spiritual giant. You, whoever you are, wherever you are, God can transform you. Just say yes. And October 4th is the perfect day to say yes, because heaven is watching. Saint Francis is interceding. Padre Pio is praying with you. And God is waiting to use you in ways you can't even imagine. How many of you are going to pray the prayer penned by Saint Francis today, October 4th? Write instrument in the comments if you want to be used by God. And tell me, which part of the prayer touched you the most? Was it where there is hatred, let me sow love? Was it is in giving that we receive? Was it is in dying that we are born? Comment honestly. And tag that person you know needs to become an instrument of peace. Your comment could change someone's life today.